Hey y'all, this is Dr. LaLa. Welcome back to another episode of the RE3Volve Podcast. This is the place where believers meet at the intersection of grief, loss, and transition to explore how faith and therapy help along the way. Because grief and loss are a journey and not a final destination. How y'all doing today? Today, I would like to talk about what it's like to grieve while leading. Because most leaders experience seasons of grief, transition, loss. And leadership after grief is different. Because a lot of times, if you don't have the ability to relate, it definitely gives you a different perspective. Healing while leading reshapes your capacity, your pace, your rhythms, your discernment. And a lot of times, leaders who've experienced grief and who had to heal while continuing to lead, it definitely changes them. A lot of times you show up more wise and more intentional about how you serve. And so let's talk about this myth of the strong leader, right? Because in general, the world expects leaders to be strong. And so when we say leaders are expected to be strong, we're saying that means they're unshakable, that nothing affects them. They're always composed, or they're always confident. They know exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. They know exactly what to say, when to say it, how to say it. But grief disrupts that myth. Because when you're in the midst of grieving, it throws everything off. Even as a leader, it throws everything off. Because even though you're the CEO, even though you're the founder, even though you're the nurse manager, the charge nurse, the shift lead, you're the architect, you're the owner. No matter what position you hold, you're still human. Things still hurt you. Things still bother you. And as a leader, when you try to hold on to that mantle, to that myth of being strong all the time, eventually pressure will build. And we know what they say, pressure bursts pipes, right? It's only a matter of time before you holding all of that in shows up in how you show up for the people that you lead, right? It might make you emotionally isolate, so you don't share with anybody. It might force you to put pressure on yourself to go in on a day when you probably should have stayed home, right? Or to speed up on a deliverable that you should take a step back from so that you can gather your thoughts to ensure that you're able to show up at your full capacity. You may be spiritually exhausted. Your nervous system may be overloaded. You're anxious all the time. You're frustrated, irritable. or even chronic self-silencing, biting your tongue when you shouldn't. Yeah. That's what happens sometimes when you aren't taking active steps to manage your healing process while you lead. Because healing while lead requires some work. There are some things that we have to do in order to be an effective leader while on a healing journey. First of all, being emotionally honest and starting with yourself, being honest with yourself about how you feel and why you feel the way you feel. Because we can't heal what we can't name. Having the discernment to know when to step back, when to take time off, when to speak and when not to speak, right? Knowing when your system is overloaded, knowing when you're overwhelmed. It's important to recognize those signs in yourself so that you can adjust accordingly. Because while we're human, when we take the time to learn ourselves and to know the signals that our bodies send us, because our bodies are messengers, right? When we listen to those messages, it helps us to not put ourselves in precarious situations. So that we are managing our emotions and our emotions aren't managing us, right? Setting boundaries. Being able to delegate without feeling guilty about it. Because there are some tasks that you can pass on and allow somebody else to take care of them. They have the skills, they have the tools, they have the knowledge to be able to take care of that task for you. So delegate when possible. Being spiritually grounded. Going to the Father. Reading your scripture. Tattooing his words on your heart. Because sometimes you have to call on that word to get through the day. Because even though we may be going through a season of grief, it doesn't exempt you from having to show up. Right? And then also showing compassion to yourself. And giving yourself grace. You don't have to be perfect all the time. Perfection isn't required. Right? You're allowed to be human. And even with all of these tools and skills, many leaders still feel pressured to perform strength, to be strong. So what do I mean when I say they feel pressured to perform strength? To show up at work and appear okay, even though they're not. To stay composed at all times. And I'm not saying that when you go into work to go in and just fall apart. That's not what I'm saying at all. You know, that's not what I'm saying that is expected of you. But what I am saying is that you don't have to go into all of these details about what's going on, but you're allowed to say, I'm having a rough day today. And leave it at that. You know, you don't have to say, oh, it's gumdrops and lollipops when it's not. And then even as leaders, having these experiences ourselves actually help us to create a different environment for our teams, because we lead by example, right? And so by us being able to come in and be vulnerable, that gives our team members to be able the opportunity to do the same thing. Because again, I'm not saying that we come in and we just fall apart and we aren't productive, we can't get anything done and all of those types of things, because truly there are some of those days. And when we're having that type of day, we should stay home if we can, right? But change is a part of life. And so I think it's important as leaders for us to create spaces for people to experience change and transition and be safe to do that at work. Because just because I'm at work doesn't make me not have whatever challenges I'm having. If my mom passed away, she still passed away and I'm at work. Does that make sense? Right? So, giving people the space to experience whatever they're experiencing, to maintain productivity. And to push through pain. And I know that there are some days when we have to do what we have to do. I know that. But some days it's okay to put it down. As a leader, it's okay to put it down sometimes. Sometimes you have to feel what you feel instead of pushing through it, right? And a lot of times this pressure comes from the culture that we're in. The expectations that are held, that are assigned. The perfectionism that we may place on ourselves. The fear of disappointing folks. And so that goes back to what I was saying earlier about, as leaders, about us setting the tone for what our work environments look like. Because we lead by example. And so all of these expectations, we set them. And it's okay for you to disrupt the norm, for you to disrupt the status quo. Just because that's how everybody does it doesn't mean that has to be the way you do it, right? So then how do we as leaders move from performance to authenticity? Authentic leaders are able to be transparent. Being honest without just pouring out your emotions and your feelings onto your team members, because you can be honest and not overload them with what you have going on. Having a regulated nervous system, recognizing when you're overwhelmed, when you're overstimulated, being able to recognize that and know when you need to take a break. Setting a rhythm for rest, actually taking the time to get some rest and not pushing through, because there's only going to be a matter of time before you burn out. Being purposeful about the pace that you're setting. You don't have to be in a rush to get everything done right now, this minute. Accept support when it's offered. Because again, you don't have to do everything yourself. Spirit-led decision making. As believers who are leaders, seeking the Father's face, praying about decisions before we make them when we're in certain seasons, in which we should do that all the time anyway. But when we're in certain seasons, it's even that much more important that we seek the Father's face so that we can assure that we can be sure that we're making the right decision based on His word in alignment with His purpose, as opposed to doing something based purely on our emotions, our feelings, or the situation at hand. And then as leaders who are healing, we're able to make leadership decisions that are coming from a healed space. Because healed leaders move differently. They think differently. They lead differently. And the thing is, you can be healing and a leader at the same time. Because leaders go through things too. Leaders struggle sometimes too. Healing and calling can coexist. But 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." So even as a leader, you don't have to lean on your own strength and your own capacity. Because God's strength is revealed when you are at your capacity. Right? His strength. Not yours, but His. So even when you're going through that season of weakness, even when you're going through that season of struggle, you're not by yourself. The Father's with you. And then also our mindsets about healing and leadership, what that looks like. Romans 12:2 says, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." And so part of the renewal process in this particular instance is letting go of the myth that as the person in charge, you have to be strong and you have to be perfect and you have to show up a certain way all the time. That you're unbreakable. That you have to be invincible. Because we just talked about how God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. That His grace is sufficient. So you don't have to do this by yourself. You don't have to show up in this way as perfect. Because the Father is with you. And so you don't have to be on this journey alone, right? And here is the beautiful thing. Leaders who are healing gain strengths that transform them as you lead. Because it does. Because a lot of times when you're healing, when you're in the healing process, you lose bandwidth. There are just some things you just don't have the tolerance for anymore. A lot of times you're emotionally fatigued. You have a hard time concentrating. You're more sensitive than you normally are. Sometimes your motivation to get things done can go up and down. And it's just a part of the healing process. These things happen. But on the other side of that, right? A lot of times you gain deeper empathy because now you can relate to a certain degree, right? It makes you more emotionally intelligent. You're better able to read the room. You may pick up on things now that you weren't able to pick up on before because you never experienced it, but now you've been there. So you recognize it when you see it. It helps you to listen, to understand, as opposed to respond. You're most likely going to be a better listener. You're able to make grounded decisions. You're less likely to make decisions based purely on emotion. More than likely, you've gained the ability to take a step back and to actually give it some thought before making a rash decision. And it makes you more compassionate. Because there are some things you just don't have the ability to relate to unless you've been through it. And you know what it's like in theory, but until you've had to go through it yourself, you don't really know what it's like. Because, it's just like performing CPR. You know what they taught you in class, but you don't know what performing CPR is until you actually have to do those chest compressions and those rescue breaths. So you know what it's like in theory, but it's entirely different to know what it's like to be exhausted and still giving chest compressions and rescue breaths. Right? And so healing doesn't weaken you as a leader. It doesn't. It actually refines you, no different than silver or gold that goes through fire. Right? Because that fire burns out the imperfections. Sometimes these journeys in life, it's the same process of gold going through that refining process. Right? Sometimes that's what it looks like. And as leaders, we just have to be prepared to do it, because the thing is, leadership doesn't exempt you from having to go through pain. It doesn't. It's not the absence of pain. Leadership is the stewardship of purpose while navigating pain. Because we still have a purpose. We still have a call. Even in the midst of whatever we're going through. Even in the midst of whatever you're going through. Those things can coexist. But as a healing leader, you are faithful. You are becoming exactly who God calls you to be. And you are refined. You are becoming the best version of yourself. And so if you are a leader in a healing season, I want to encourage you, because it won't always be like this. And everything we go through is a lesson and an opportunity to grow and evolve. It's something that can be used to make you a better leader, to make you a better example of what leadership looks like. And so I want you to be encouraged. This journey is not in vain. because God wastes nothing. And you are called according to his purpose. And so even this is for your good. And so until next time, keep choosing healing. Keep choosing joy. I love y'all. Bye.